Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining. We're just going to give it a couple more minutes for folks to join in. As it is a lunchtime event, we're trying to be mindful of that.
I'm just going to grab another cup of coffee while we're in pause mode. I'll be right back.
For those of you just popping in, thanks for joining us. We're just giving it a couple minutes for folks to join, and as soon as Bobbi returns to the screen, we'll probably kick this one off. Nope, and here she is. All right. Well, yeah, we're 4 minutes past the 12 o'clock hour. I think it's as good a time as any to get things rolling. There's a fair amount of information that Bobbi's going to convey, and I want to leave her as much time as possible to share that with you, and then allowing for some time for questions at the end. So, I suppose without further ado, I'd just like to introduce Bobbi Hudson, the Executive Director of the Pacific Shellfish Institute, to just take it away, Bobbi, I guess. Share your screen and get at it.
All right. Sure I share the right thing here. All right, sorry for that. Okay. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me, Jason et al. Yeah, I think I know most of you, but if you don't know me, yeah, I'm the executive director of the Pacific Shellfish Institute. We are a nonprofit based in Washington State, but we do work on shellfish, as our name would indicate, all across the country, but especially here on the West Coast. And I've been involved in aquaculture, mariculture in Alaska for, gosh, probably about 12 years now. Um, so yeah, take it away. Jason was admiring this photo, so I do want to give credit here. I took this picture of these beautiful Hog Island oysters at the Shellfish Lovers Ultimate Rejuvenation Party here in Olympia, which is a fundraiser for the Pacific Coast Shellfish Growers Association that happens every year in the springtime. And these were just gorgeous, so I snapped the shot, and we're using it a lot in this tech memo that covers the information I have to share with you today. So my outline, we will talk about regional U.S. oyster production, some supply estimates that were done, delve a little bit into oyster markets with some information about restaurants, exports and imports. And then my favorite part to talk about is these expert interviews and highlights from what they shared with me that I think are relevant to many of you. And then end with some recommendations. So my co-authors on all this work are Bob Rowe. He is the director of the East Coast Shellfish Growers Association. I know he's given webinars for AMA and others in the past, so some of you may be familiar with him, longtime shellfish person from the Northeast. Dr. Matt Parker is an extension specialist with University of Maryland and Maryland Sea Grant. He is an economist. And Dr. Michael Rubino, he's the former director of the Office of Aquaculture, and he just recently retired. His final position was seafood strategist or seafood strategy director for Office of Aquaculture. So all of this work really was his brainchild. And most of this research and writing was done by myself and Bob and Matt. So with that, let's delve into these regional oyster production estimates. So we gathered state level production data from every coastal state that produces oysters, either wild harvest or aquaculture or both. As you might imagine, there's varying degrees of quality for this data. Some states are doing a great job, others not so much, for a variety of reasons. But these graphs sort of give you the general trends, who the leaders are. So in the Northeast, these are single oysters shown. The leader here is Massachusetts, followed by Connecticut. But regionally, oyster aquaculture in the US is dominated in the Northeast and the West Coast, where wild harvest is more is minimal. In the Northeast, it's dominated by small growers, often limited by access to large leases, and that prevents economies of scale. So the Mid-Atlantic, this region historically has had major production for oysters, but it was decimated by diseases, unfortunately. So luckily, development of disease-resistant lines has allowed resurgence of farmed oysters. And Virginia in particular, during my career, which spans 20 years in this area of shellfish aquaculture, I can't believe, Virginia has really come to the forefront. They have dramatically increased production since 2010, and now they top production for the entire East Coast. And Maryland has also adopted favorable lease laws and joined top producers, and that's shown there in green. So in the Gulf Coast, different story. Many are probably familiar. Louisiana historically had significant wild harvest, and state harvest data still suggests that Louisiana tops the entire East Coast. So in other words, Louisiana production meets or exceeds the entire East Coast oyster harvest. In the Gulf, there isn't a lot of intensive oyster culture though, as we see in other parts of the country, but it is starting to take off, particularly in Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, and Texas. And those regions in just the last couple of years have really had a concerted effort to develop intensive aquaculture, a lot of oyster grow systems, flip farm systems, but their tidal range is quite different than ours in the Northwest, and especially in Alaska. They don't have a huge tidal exchange. They do have issues with freshwater, but areas that have better, higher saline waters, that's where oyster aquaculture is starting to take place there. And they're also seeing public and private investments in hatcheries, which is significant. Here on the West Coast, when I present this slide, I invite people to argue with me because that green line is trending down, and I don't believe that. But unfortunately, that's the best data that we have. That green line is Washington State. Washington leads the country in oyster production, but our state production data has issues. Yeah, so we've been working on this for quite some time, trying to get some better quality data, but this is what it shows. Unfortunately, that does have implications for some of the other analyses that we're able to do because of the poor data quality for our largest producing state. So as I show this information, I also highlight Alaska, as you'll probably be happy to hear, but clearly Alaska has some challenges reaching consumers. So remoteness of farms and access to cold storage and shipping options sort of limit options and present challenges. So supply estimates, these were done by Matt Parker. So he took a look at, excuse me, what's the overall oyster supply here in the US. So if we look at aquaculture, wild caught, harvested oysters, imports and exports, you get the net supply of oysters here in the US. So the point of this is it has stayed fairly consistent over time, but has been increasing. Obviously, we had that dip in 2020 corresponding with COVID, but data do exist to take a look at this. Aquaculture certainly exceeds imports and exports for most years, but wild harvest is pretty significant as well. And a lot of that is coming from the Gulf Coast, also the Chesapeake. So getting into the market information, this was actually really challenging to gather. Again, Matt Parker did this, ECSGA, Skid, or Bob Rowe, and his staff also contributed to this estimate. But we were really trying to get what's the average price to the consumer for a single oyster across the country. It does vary regionally, but it's really difficult to get this information because it's simply not there. You might think about if you love oysters like I do, you go to an oyster bar and there's a price listed for a single or a dozen oysters, but that menu often just says market price, or it's written on a chalkboard. It's not something, it's not a piece of data that is kept in perpetuity and is accessible online. So they really scoured social media, all sorts of options to get this information, but it does give us a pretty good picture. Again, some missing data points corresponding with COVID times and more recently since then. But price did top out in 2019, according to this analysis, and has gone down a bit. And I'll make some more comments about this later on in the presentation, but we certainly know that right now, today, consumer confidence is low and oyster markets are certainly slumping a bit. We entered into this research thinking that anecdotal evidence was indicating there might be a bit of a slump in demand for oysters, and that is certainly coming to fruition right now, unfortunately. Buckashuck, it's a funny thing, but certainly a cornerstone of some restaurants and bars over time. These were seen as lost leaders, getting people in to buy oysters for a single dollar. If you convert that to $20, $24, of course, the further back you go, less value there is for this product. It's less common for these buckashuck promotions happening now, but they are still out there. So getting into more detailed data about restaurant menus, we contracted with Data Central, who also worked with Food for Climate League on some analysis done there in Alaska, which is how I connected with them actually. But they gave us a lot of really high-level information about oysters on menus across the country, so we can parse these out by different regions. And this is price, again, adjusted for inflation, analysis done by Matt Parker again. So kind of all over the place, but you can see some regional trends. So more interesting to me, I find, is this menu penetration. So they're able, Data Centrals is able to look at by region how frequently oysters appear on menus. And so over time, it's actually gone down, unfortunately. So back in 2014, about 3.3% of menus, and I should say this is 4,800 menus across the country, or 4,800 restaurants across the country. It has gone down to only 2.4% of menus among those 4,800 restaurants actually have an oyster item on them. We can look at by region. Like I said, there are fairly significant differences. Oysters appear on menus much more frequently in the Gulf and the Southeast than they do in other parts of the country, particularly in the Midwest. Which shouldn't come as a surprise that they're usually in particular kinds of restaurants. So fine dining and casual, I would say casual often represents seafood restaurants. But we're not seeing it in national chains. I found that very interesting. Across the entire country, not a single national chain had oysters on the menu. And I can't quite see my full slides because I've got, let's see if I can, what's that? There we go, sorry. But our regional chains do have oysters on the menu, but more frequently you're seeing oysters on menus in independent restaurants. So exports and imports very briefly. We do have this data. So National Marine Fisheries Service statistics do show that 10% of US farm oysters are being exported. Canada, up until recently, and our current situation of US and Canada relations not being great, Canada was consuming about $10 million worth of our US oysters. Other exporters, significant exports were going to Hong Kong and Asia, a little bit going to Europe and South America. but very minor imports there. European Union, significant conversations over the years. Industry tried to win access to EU markets after a trade spat. After years of negotiations, Massachusetts and Washington were able to export to the EU, and vice versa. The EU can now send oysters into Massachusetts and Washington. At that time, assurances were made that other states and nations would be allowed to participate, but that hasn't happened. So we know that particularly along the eastern seaboard, there's a lot of frustration about this, that more states are not allowed to get their oysters out, and yet they're coming into Massachusetts. So anyway, that is a significant issue. If we look at other imported oysters, we have a ton coming in from Canada, and that's mainly from PEI, from the eastern seaboard of Canada and New Brunswick. Those oysters are coming into the Northeast. Like I said, I'm a oyster lover. I go to oyster bars and restaurants that have raw oysters, no matter what city I'm in. If it's available, I'm checking it out. I don't see those PEI oysters as frequently, or New Brunswick oysters as frequently on the West Coast as I do on the East Coast, and hardly see them at all in the Gulf. The other two areas that are bringing a lot of oysters into the US are South Korea and Mexico. Those Mexican oysters, that has increased. You can see that bottom line on the graph there. The colors all match when I import them into my Excel template or my PowerPoint template. It automatically changes the colors, and they're not ideal for seeing the differences. But anyway, that bottom one is Mexico, and you can see that has been increasing. So Baja Peninsula in particular has been growing more oysters, and we're seeing those come up, especially into California. They're not going broadly across the country, but they are coming into California and Texas, I should say. So expert interviews. This was probably one of my favorite parts of this project. Bob Rowe and I did all of these interviews, and major thanks to the individuals that spoke to us. So we had 23 different companies representing producers, hatcheries, shucker packers, and wholesalers from every region of the country. I also want to note that in the US, we don't have massive companies that have shellfish farms in the West Coast, the Gulf Coast, and the East, right? We're very regionally based. We don't, everybody knows about Taylor Shellfish. They're the biggest shellfish producer in the US, but they only have operations on the West Coast. They don't cover the entire country. However, they do have distribution. But suffice to say, it was important that we talk to all these different people because they have different markets that they're selling into, different local consumer desires. So yeah, major thanks to the folks that spoke to us. Highlights from those interviews, it's very clear that there's a preferred size for oysters. So most consumers want a small oyster, 2.5 to 3.5 inches, some variation in specific markets. There are also clearly two types of consumers, according to our experts, and makes sense to me. So there's the folks that prefer the smaller sized oysters with a deep cup, and those that prefer the larger oysters. And those individuals feel like they're getting a better value if it's larger. And then there's certain markets like Asian markets and folks that are really want grilling or roasting oysters that want those larger oysters as well. So value added products, this is really significant. I know there is certainly a growing interest in value added products, but especially the smoke and tinned oysters, breaded fried oysters, frozen, top off, folks call it half shell oysters. So top off, that oyster can then be frozen and presented like that. But tinned fish is seeing such a resurgence after a lot of excitement during COVID times, and it has continued to increase. I know it just popped in my inbox today, a story about tinned fish sort of saving a particular market or company and their markets. But anyway, there is this sense that if a product could simply be tossed in the microwave, there would be strong demand. I find that really disgusting to think about, but I get it. Consumers want something easy to put on the dinner table. Amongst our interviewees, one respondent mentioned that their tinned fish business, oyster business, is up 50% in the last year. Another respondent secured 450 whole food locations selling tinned, locally sourced oysters. That's also significant because if you go in the grocery store and you look at those tinned fish options, they're almost always coming from overseas. And so we're starting to see a desire for locally sourced seafood and especially oysters. And our producers are able to get into those markets. So that's a good trend. Other highlights, there is a widely recognized need for more market research, targeting marketing to the Midwest, and initiatives to share a farm story with consumers, telling a unique story for each farm and selling their product, setting their product apart from the competition according to traits such as flavor or shape. And this allows growers to avoid price competition. These are not commodities, and we really shouldn't be thinking about oysters on the half shell as a commodity. So several respondents specifically mentioned a need to market to younger consumers. I think that's also of interest. One respondent suggested a national marketing effort to develop a consistent message. Respondents also suggested focusing on sustainability, health, and eco benefits of eating oysters, government investments in public education to provide opportunities to improve social license for oyster aquaculture. Very important, in my opinion. Educational campaigns need to dispel myths, or at least put things in perspective, especially surrounding environmental concerns like PFAS or microplastics. Something I've done quite a bit of work on, that microplastics one. So recommendations, overarching, moving us along. So amongst all those interviews, we came up with these 4 overarching recommendations, and I'm going to read them to you. To increase collaboration between growers, marketers, and regulators to address industry challenges and promote sustainable growth. To invest in public education campaigns to dispel myths about oyster safety and highlight their environmental benefits. To develop marketing strategies that emphasize oyster quality, sustainability, and unique culinary experiences. And 4th, to explore new technologies and farming practices to improve oyster survival rates and address environmental threats. So each of those things have other areas of interest embedded in them. We talked about value-added products. Wet storage is also something that we recommend, opportunities to sort of streamline processes, getting product to market, holding it, being more opportunities for more predictable timelines and getting product out the door. Genetics for disease resistance and production traits is perpetually important. Consolidation, that's a tough one to highlight, but it is important. Consolidation can allow economies of scale that are not available to smaller producers. Mechanization is a huge one. People ask me, what do shellfish aquaculturists need now? What are the most pressing issues? I used to say regulatory constraints. Right now and in recent years, it's mechanization to cut production costs and labor costs. Labor is an issue. Mechanization. We need more opportunities there to make it easier on our farmers' bodies and to cut costs. Marketing, especially to emphasize quality and sustainability of farming practices. And finally, economic analyses and improved aquaculture data. I already touched on that, improving aquaculture data a bit. So all of this is shortly to be released in a NOAA Tech memo. In the meantime, we do have this fact sheet that's available. I know it was pushed along with announcement of this webinar. But with that, I will take any questions. I will stop sharing screen.
Great presentation, Bobbi. Thanks for sharing all that. We'll open it up to questions. Hi, Marcos. Go ahead.
Bobbi. Hey, hey, thanks for that. I'm wearing my lucky hat today, so I figured I'd go first. You know why it's lucky?
Oh, no.
Because it says lucky. Very simple.
Oh.
Hey, so on the canned product side of that, are you aware of any processes or technology to make the process of getting the meat out, extracting the meat, short of different from hand shucking, that have been implemented in other places that might automate that process or make it, because that's labor, right?
Absolutely. Great question, Marcos. And actually, I've been asked that similar question previously when I've given this presentation. So yes, high pressure processing is something that can be done to sort of sever the adductor muscle and make it easier for oysters to come away from the shell. That does cook it, but if you're going to heat process these oysters as a tinned option, you're going to do that anyway, so it's not significantly going to impact your quality. I, for one, don't love high pressure processed oysters if I'm going to eat them raw. But other things that have been done, mechanized shucking has been explored quite a bit. We don't have a solution here on the West Coast with Pacific oysters yet, and it's not perfected for Eastern oysters either. There's just such a variety of shell sizes and shapes. Although as the industry, I would say more broadly, has created more uniform oysters in individual farms products, namely through cage culture, that is looking more promising. So the opportunities for mechanized shucking certainly warrant some more research, but there's not a product yet. There's nothing ready to go right now. But you can heat the oysters. That makes it easier to shuck, and that's how most home consumers do it.
As a follow-up on that question, when you say tinned oysters, are those smoked oysters or were they like sardines where you come in a variety of different flavors?
Typically smoked, but there are a variety of flavors, and you've probably seen some of them in the marketplace. The one I'm most familiar with is a Coney here in Washington, and they have a variety of different flavors. They're marketed as smoked, but to my knowledge and having seen that operation, it's not actually smoked like we think of smoking fish in a big smoker. So yeah, variety of products.
Because they're hard to light.
Say again?
Because they're hard to light.
Oh, damn it. Walked into that one too.
Thanks, Bobbi. Are you going to circulate this slideshow to all the participants, or make it generally available, or how on that?
This webinar is being recorded and will end up going up on our YouTube channel as well.
Okay.
And then when was the release date on the fuller piece, Bobbi?
I don't have that yet. I was really hoping this month. I can't directly point to the shutdown as limiting it, but it is contributing to it. It is currently in our content expert review, and then it will be released by NOAA Fisheries as a tech memo.
Great.
I'm happy to share the presentation though. I have, as some on this call know, I have been sharing the slides. I just can't share the full tech memo until it's got through the review.
Got it. A couple of questions in the chat related to the tin fish stuff. First from Dan Lesh, what about the vacuum sealed cooked oysters? And are those also increasing with the tin market, or are they considered part of the tin market when you talk about the tin market overall?
Good question, Dan. I do consider those sort of part of the tin market. The way that I've seen those, again, a Coney, they're doing it. They're selling those. They go through the same process as they would if they're going into the tin, but then they just vacuum seal it and sell it at seafood stores. So it's just more of it's not quite shelf ready, but it's closer to shelf stable.
Have you seen anyone do it into a retort pouch, like smoked salmon as use those aluminum based retort pouches that are shelf stable?
I have not personally. That doesn't mean it's not there. There are quite a few, a handful, not quite a few, that are doing the frozen sealed products, breaded frozen shucked oysters. My anecdotal observation has been it's pretty hard for them to get into the market as it is right now, because there's a lot of foreign product that's meeting that need.
Very cost effective, the foreign product.
Exactly. Any idea how many oysters fit in a standard size tin? Oh, I don't know, Mark. And I don't know what a standard size tin is. Yeah. I can't answer that. Sorry. Oh, and Marcos has answered that. Some depends on the size of the oysters and the size of the tin. So yeah.
I
Any
have a
other
question on
question?
the sort of the whether it's the vacuum sealed or tin, whatever the case may be, it's sort of a packaged, processed packaged product. Are they really, for the most part, being generated for direct to consumer, or are there some like folks that are putting together larger packages intended for food service or something like that?
Hmm. I think direct to consumer, and I say I think because that's the only thing I've seen or talked to folks about. Yeah, I can't think of a similar product as, to use Marcos as an example. I know he was doing some of that with kelp for Seagrove. I have not seen that on the shellfish side for direct to restaurants or to that distribution channel.
Thank you. Any other questions?
That was so funny to do this via webinar because I can't see y'all.
Um, Bobbi, I have a question on
Yeah.
the quality of the imported oysters. There must be some higher quality ones. Canada comes to mind, but what about the other countries, the higher end imports? Picture, can you describe that?
Higher in imports. Yeah, Mexico, Canada. We don't, and I have to admit, I don't know all the details of why this is, but we don't allow imports from a lot of the Asian countries of fresh product. We only allow the processed product, and folks that know more about Alaska seafood there may be some equivalencies there. But raw product doesn't come from a lot of places, but other high quality markets, I was like France, right? We just don't get those products coming into our country. And they produce a high quality product that they keep in their region. So we really are competing with our area of the country, North America.
A random note a couple of days ago, and I don't know why they would send it to me, but I received a out of the blue email from a company called Global Pro saying, starting November, we will have a steady production of frozen half-shell oysters from Mexico, tariff-free. We also have an inventory in Los Angeles, and our case count is 96 per case, 8 dozens at $46.37, $46.37 per case. That must just, but I just saw that just came into my email randomly. I don't know why they picked me. I've never heard of them before. I don't know anything about it, but
I haven't either, but that is kind of indicative of what we're seeing. That growth in Mexico is really increasing, and they're making their way into US markets. And the cost of production is just simply lower than we have, particularly than Alaska has. It is a challenge. That sort of, I will comment, the top off oyster is top of mind for me right now. I just did a couple weeks in New Zealand last month and got to see their oyster industry, and that's very normal for them. They actually sell top off, not frozen. Like that's how they distribute their product. So it all goes, it's top off shucked by hand and put into trays and then distributed in trays rather than whole like we do. And just conversations with actually the owner of Foot Farm was saying, oh yeah, I forget what he called it, but I was like, everybody in my group was confused. We're like, oh, top off. We call it top off. But yeah, they take the top off. They don't sever the bottom adductor muscle, and it's distributed to their consumers, including restaurants, distributors, that way, which is interesting. It's just not what we do here.
yeah, interesting. And so there's no liquor or anything. It's just a fresh, it's like a jarred product, but in the shell.
Yeah, kind of odd.
Interesting.
It tastes good. I certainly enjoyed them.
Well, it kind of, things like when that kind of takes away this or does something with this concept that if you have live oysters that you've shipped, and you get a few that popped, but they've been maintained cold, then they should be just fine for something. There's certainly nothing wrong with them. Well,
Bobby, is there any market for the liquor itself without shucked meats with it?
Not that I've heard of.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, when you look at like oyster sauces and stuff, I mean that comes up a lot in the something I didn't even talk about today was the social media and influence mentions of oysters. It's usually oyster sauce. And so oyster sauce is made by cooking down the whole thing. So you're not just taking a liquor, you're cooking down the whole oyster. So yeah, anyway.
We'll do a cocktail that uses kelp vodka and oyster liquor and call it something cool. Sell it for double the price.
Kelpster.
That's the only kind of liquor I can buy with my federal grant.
Good comment. Well, any other questions? Any skill testing questions? Except for Marcos. I'm kidding.
Not seeing anything right now. Last call, but otherwise, I'm going to start saying thank you to Bobbi for joining us today and presenting. Oh, I see Sam has come off.
Yeah, I'll throw in one. Just I'm curious that I kind of shared your intuitive, not like kind of disgust in the idea of that like microwave product, but know that my own taste isn't always That's why we do market research because it's not indicative of everyone's taste. Is that kind of a product that you encountered in the world, or is that something that someone like proposed? I didn't understand that point.
I have encountered it. It has a long history with clams and mussels. And that's still in the shell, usually the clams and mussels. And so it is, there were a product that was mussels and five, that was put out by, Goose Point Oysters. And yeah, it was like a TV dinner in a package, and you just throw it in the microwave. And so it already had the sauce in it. And we know that's what consumers are looking for. So oysters could, be the same thing, probably out of the shell. I have seen, like I mentioned, the frozen breaded oysters. Those are sold kind of like a chicken nugget would be sold. So you can cook it however you want to. Probably going to have better results putting it in an air fryer than popping it in the microwave, I guess is my thinking. So I'm not a huge fan of microwaves in general, unless I'm heating up my cup of coffee or something.
One last question, if you'll let me, is do you have any idea, or is there data to support a projection on what the future production of oysters is going to be? What kind of capacity, additional areas, additional production, additional seed availability, things like that would indicate are we maxed out in our capacity in the U.S. and that's why we're looking for Mexican and Canadian oysters, or is there still room, and is there investment in expanding that production for Pacifics and Eastern oysters? Yeah,
excellent question. We do provide a prediction in the tech memo. I haven't included that in this presentation. I can share that individual analysis with you because it's just a graph. But yeah, Matt Parker did do some projections. We do have concerns about those because each time we've presented them to sort of content experts, they push back on that analysis. So we're a little uneasy about it. And
for Alaska, there are a number of farms that are in permitting or recently permitted, and it looks like there's the prospect for a relative to Alaska's production numbers, capacity increases seems quite likely, but I don't know if that's localized or if it's indicative of what's going on around the country.
And I as of late, like I commented, there certainly has been a slowing of demand. Everybody I'm talking to, slowing of demand, having a hard time selling their oysters, to the raw half shell market. But I think that that's more about consumer confidence than it is about like overarching supply and long-term trends. So I think there is still absolutely opportunities for growth. And that's what our research indicated, that there was certainly opportunities for growth. And we were trying to highlight areas to facilitate that growth more productively.
Thank you very much.
Well, thanks all. Thanks for listening and for the questions, and happy to continue the conversation as I see you all out and about in the communities.
Thanks again, Bobbi, and thanks everybody for joining us.